Hello, cyber warriors. So today in English Tech Talk series, we are going to have a podcast with Mr. Matt Scheurer. And 2013, he started as a system administrator. So far he has like around 12 years of experience with various domains. And he started as a system administrator. He then later on he worked as a system security engineer, and then he is a vice president for a company. And then he is a host in thread trails. And thread trails, what it does is they do have a podcast, and then they do cover news and latest trends in cybersecurity. When it comes to competency skills, Matt has cloud security, instant response skills, career navigations, and hacking web APIs, data security, and some for freaking and hacker histories as well. And thanks and welcome, Mr. Matt, for coming to our podcast, Matt. And first question, before going to a questions, let me give a small introduction about Cyber Voyage, Matt. So Cyber Voyage 2021 we have started for cyber education in India to bring more cyber education, to bring more cyber security warriors across all the places. So 2021 we have started. So far we do have a 450k cyber warriors. We always tell them like the podcast whatever we do and perform with the other person, we get questions from cyber warriors, Matt. And we have got lots of questions here to get an insights from you, because based on your experience you have got huge insights. You'll be sharing huge insights, and we are waiting to get an insight from you, Matt. And thanks and welcome, Mr. Matt. And the first thing is we would like to know your core competency skills is like incident response and DFIR, and how did you got into a cyber security domain, Matt? Because as a system administrator, how did you get into a cyber security domain, and how you started as a because when we looked at your background, you given lots of talks in multiple conference, CoCon, ConCon, DEFCON, Black Hat, and ISACA. They have lots of conference talks you have given. So we would like to know from you, how did you start your cybersecurity journey, and how did you get into a DFIR, Mr. Matt?
Sure. So great questions. Thank you so much. First of all, for inviting me on the podcast. It's great to participate here. I think really for myself, kind of came up in the hacker underground back in the day. You have a little bit of a glimpse of my work history. I don't list the entire thing online, so I have really cut my teeth doing help desk stuff. I have had a lot of different technology roles, and as you alluded to, doing systems administration, doing network administration, and really those core competencies and skills really paved the way for me to eventually get an opportunity to work in cybersecurity. I'll be honest with you, I was on the outside looking in of a cybersecurity career for a long time. So for anybody struggling to make that leap, I would say don't give up, because persistence and staying after it can eventually pay off. And the more opportunity you get, the more you can prove you know how to do what you can do, is a great illustration of a solid work history that will and can absolutely pave the way to getting into a cybersecurity career. But I think really what helps is when you have a background like mine, that you've done a lot of different things, you've worn so many different hats, it gives you a lot of experience across the board dealing with a lot of different technologies and tools. And when you understand how things should work, or more to the point, things that are happening that maybe shouldn't be, it helps you identify what's normal, what isn't normal, what is within a baseline. In other words, if you were looking at a security alert or something like that, it helps you understand, okay, this is plausible for business as usual activity, but this, like, I should never see mshta.exe running outside of the syswow64 or system32 folder under C Windows. Like, it just shouldn't happen. So if I see it happen, it's bad. I think in terms of getting to where I have with digital forensics and incident responses, I've actually done a lot of different roles within information security. Particularly, I worked at a bank in the past and was kind of a wear all the hats security engineer. And it was everything from talking to auditors, maybe not my favorite thing to do, but it was, I always learned a lot in the process of doing that, to next generation firewall rules and writing those and pushing those out to endpoint security and antivirus. Have a history of doing email administration, which helped me get a great foundation for reading email headers and looking at different email threats and those kinds of things. And I've done a good bit of AppSec in the past. I was a bug crowd ambassador, so I did a little bit of bug bounty stuff. I've done just so many different things. But for me, what talked to me is I'm one of these people, I love to be where the action is all the time. And I found digital forensics and incident response was that. A lot of people look on the outside looking in, they think offensive security, oh, it's cool, hands on keyboard, hacking things all day long. You do get to do some of that, but it's actually a smaller percentage of the job than writing reports and staging and sort of building infrastructure and doing reconnaissance and maybe research. And a lot of the things aren't the cool hands on keyboard hacking stuff. Whereas if you have an internet presence that's under attack all day, every day, it doesn't ever stop. So if you like to be where the action is, which I do, for me, that's digital forensics and incident response all day, every day.
Uh, Thanks, Mr. Matt. So you've given like the best word is don't give up. Because you don't give up because you are not belongs to cybersecurity background, but you wanted to get into a cybersecurity background because you don't give up and you keep trying. And second thing you mentioned was how things work. If something is doing, if something is which you are working on, how it works. So let's say if you are installing a tool, don't work on the tool and how things work. So that's what you clearly mentioned the statement. And usual and unusual activities. If there is a computer, and what could be the usual one, what could be the unusual one, that is also you have just mentioned. And the email administration, because you had an opportunity to work with the email administration, so that you'll get to know about the email headers and each and everything, so that you got to get into a DFIR. So other thing which you mentioned was you wanted to be in an action, so that's what you just came to DFIR. And the foundation, because you were very strong in foundation because you worked in multiple roles, that's what your foundation was good, that's where you came into DFIR. So it was a very good inputs, Mr. Matt, because our cyber warriors, our community people, they are many person, they wanted to get into multiple domains, and of course based on your interests they'll be getting into a DFIR as well, Mr. Matt. And the other question is, most of the person, even not most of them, few of them, they are not aware of what is DFIR, because they, because 10 to 15 years back there was a position, okay, we have a security operations center, okay, that's what the role will be, security analyst and security associate. But what could be the DFIR? Because when I was working in security operations, and DFIR was booming it up, because they say you got an incident and just go and look at the SIM logs and look at where is source IP, what is destination IP, look at the host names, and then they'll be having a multiple modules, and keep looking at the modules. But when DFIR comes, it's totally different. And now we would like to know about the incident response in a corporate and enterprise level, how organizations are prepared for them. Let's say in a company, what is incident response, what is DFIR? So we would like to know the difference between DFIR, Mr. Matt.
Sure, that's a great question. So it depends on an organization. And again, a bit with size, right? So in some organizations, you might literally be wearing all the hats, like I described earlier, where you have to do some of everything. I think when it gets into incident response, it can be usually your earlier opportunities are more that SOC analyst kind of role where you're working in a security operations center and you're triaging tickets, you're doing a little bit of research, but a lot of it can be repetitive and so forth. I think when you get a lot of experience doing that kind of work, you get opportunities to get into where I'm at. For example, we have a CSERT team where we specifically are computer security incident response. And so we're kind of part SWAT team where we will tackle something if it looks really serious in a group setting. And sometimes we're engaging with multiple teams and so forth. And we're charged with getting to the bottom of answering who, what, where, why, when, and why, how, all of those things to understand what happened. And so that's kind of a progression that is within incident response. On the flip side of that, you also have forensic examiners. And where I work at, we actually have a team of forensic examiners. There are certainly other organizations that will contract that kind of work out, where it becomes things that are, for example, you need a chain of custody to understand how a device got somewhere, because these are things that could end up going to human resources. There are things that could get into legal counsel. These are things that could ultimately end up in a court of law, in which case you have to describe what you did as forensically sound. And there's a concept called fruit of the poison tree within forensic examiners. And the idea is, if you have a mistake somewhere along the way of your forensic collection and analysis, that calls into question everything that you did from that point going forward. In other words, it could invalidate some of the really good work you did afterwards, because you made a mistake and you couldn't account for where this, for example, let's say it's a laptop, just as an example, you couldn't account for where it was over a 2 week stretch of time, or you weren't smart, you didn't make a forensic clone of your forensic image and work from that clone. And so now all of a sudden you have modified that system. So that's something that an attorney might be able to say, well, this has been modified. So how do we know we can trust the data that was on there, that was looked at afterwards? So those are important things to understand when you get into like a forensic examiner mindset. What I do kind of sits kind of in the highest levels of incident response, where we're looking at things that are very serious, and it could be anything from a malware infestation to, do we have a ransomware incident, to, reverse engineering malware a little bit, to we do a good bit of forensics, for example, on my team, but we are not actually the forensic examiners. We have another team that does that. So when I do digital forensics and incident response, it's to understand what's happened and kind of put together a timeline for our own purposes, but it's really more of an immediate triage. We are not, and if it looks like it's going to be something that needs to go to like a HR, legal counsel, potentially could end up in the court of law, that's where we either work hand in hand with our forensic examiners, or we might turn over a case to them. Conversely, if they're looking at something, let's say they think it's a malicious insider situation, and all of a sudden, okay, this doesn't look to them like it's a malicious insider, like an insider threat. This looks more like it was somebody went to a web page, they got hit with a drive-by download and a malware infection. They will hand that over to us to investigate that kind of thing. So, and again, depending on the organization, you could wear a number of those hats. So we use a lot of forensic tools, we use a lot of forensic techniques. However, it's really for different purposes. We have different objectives, if you will. And so in security, we have a concept called separation of duties, and that falls under that purview. And again, not every size organization is going to have that luxury of having huge internal teams where they have a team for everything like that.
Thanks, Matt. So you gave a nice insights on the DFIR. The one thing is, initially a person who triage a ticket, because the person who got like a basic experience and foundation and he got into a DFIR, and it'll be a like triaging ticket. But when it comes to an incident response and digital forensics, and it's a progression, so you clearly mentioned about the progression word, and then the forensic examiner, because the forensic examiner will be looking at more data, whether the system has been compromised or not. And then you mentioned one more few inputs as well, like malware investigation. Like any malware investigation, let's say a person, they have downloaded malicious files, and it has been executed in an environment, and after that, who examines it? That's where the forensic examiner comes in, and you have clearly explained it that as well. And then the reverse engineering concept also you mentioned, and the person who downloaded a file, but the file will be having a backup in a system, and those backup file will be fetched by the forensic examiner. They will be doing a reverse engineering techniques to make sure what and how it does. That is also you have clearly explained in your insights. And insider situation, that is also you clearly told, like there will be some insider situation, but it in a different purpose. different organization use it for a different purpose. And thanks for your insights, Mr. Matt. And one more thing also, you mentioned there was a CISO team in all the organization, computer security emergency response team. They will be performing all these activities. Whoever the external researchers who send the data to a respective organization, the CISO teams will be coming in. That's where the forensic examiner will be coming in, and that's where the progression will be coming in. So it was a great insight, Mr. Matt. And the other question, few years back there was a ransomware attack, because most of the organizations are scared about the ransomware attack. And what are all the biggest challenges in forensic analysis? Because when I was working in an organization, security operation, and when an attack, they'll be keenly looking on the CV numbers, and they'll be keenly looking at the attack vectors, and if any new CV trends comes in, and then they'll do some kind of analysis on the existing tools. But when ransomware analysis comes in, the entire organization will be work like anything. So we would like to know the biggest challenging in forensic analysis on the ransomware attack. If some organization has been affected by ransomware, how the forensic analysis will be, the examiner will be investigating those particular attacks, Mr. Matt.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to ransomware, let me make this point first of all. Ransomware is literally the last step in the cyber kill chain. It's actions on objectives. It's the final thing that happens. So, ransomware is very often the most concerning thing that could happen within any organization because it's a destructive form of malware. It'll actually shred the data, make it unreadable unless you pay a ransom. And even if you pay a ransom, there's really no guarantee you're going to get all of your data back. In fact, statistics show that you're only going to get maybe half of the data back if you pay a ransom. And so things that you try to rely on, things like backups and immutable storage for those and that kind of thing, it has its place and it's definitely necessary. But what gets really tricky about ransomware is that the threat actors then will have the data. And so they will often extort or attempt to extort an organization where not only will we not give you the key to decrypt your data that's gotten encrypted, but if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to sell it in a dark marketplace. We are going to sell it to your competitors. We are going to report you to federal agencies. We're going to report you to the news media. We are going to make this as painful for you as an organization as humanly possible if you're not willing to pay a ransom. And the reason threat actors do that is because, frankly, they're trying to make it as painful for an organization as possible. So they will actually pay up that ransom demand. Now, I think where you have to be a little extra careful with ransomware, and whatever stage you're at. So first of all, you have to isolate what's happening. In other words, you have to figure out how far it got and how you can halt it just there. If it spreads past where you try to stop it, that is kind of a really bad scenario. So you want to try to make sure you're isolating properly everything that you needed to have isolated. This might even be a situation where even if you have a good sized security team, you might still have on retainer a firm that does forensic analysis that can do a third party attestation. In other words, it's a third party forensic firm that will review what you had, and even if you do a thorough job, even if you're so happy with your results, like I feel like we wrote a better report than what we got from third party, there are some partners, for example, or clients that might insist you have an attestation from an unaffiliated third party other than that was the firm contracted, so that they can prove that you are safe to reconnect and redo business with. So there's a lot of extra care and holding when it comes to a ransomware event that you might not have for other types of data breaches or compromises. So I think those are some of the challenges when we get into ransomware, as opposed to just sort of a more run-of-the-mill malware infection, or you have some sort of a data exposure problem or data compromise problem. It's when it's a situation where the data was read, it was encrypted, and those sort of things. And honestly, in a situation like that, you're probably going to need to engage. It might be your cyber insurance if your organization has cyber insurance. You might need somebody to negotiate with the ransomware holders. Okay, can here's what we can actually spare to spend on this. Here's what the business is willing to give us. Will you accept that? These are extra challenges that you don't just have with a sort of a common data breach, for lack of a better way to put that. But again, if you get ransomware, you missed the first 6 stages of the kill chain, the cyber kill chain, that if you could have stopped it there first, you wouldn't have gotten to the stage where you're ransomware at the end.
Thanks, Mr. Matt. So you got the valuable points towards the first thing, the cyber kill chain, so starting from reconnaissance, like and weaponization, delivery, and the denial of service. So all these cyber kill chain. So the last part will becomes like when we look at the ransomware attacks, which happened in an environment. That's where, because the threat actors, they'll be looking at your system, and because there are lots of threat actors like a charming kitten, lazarus, and mythic leopard. So they're all the person, they, what they do is they have a data, they'll be negotiate with us. In certain cases we do have a problem, and you have given a few things as well when the system has been attacked by ransomware. And first thing is you'll be isolating it and how far the infection has been happened, and that is also you've just given insights. And the third thing is the third party and some firm contractors will be having, and they'll be giving us a report, yes, your system is safe, and you can maybe you can resume the service, or you can uh, start working on the particular system, and the system is safe. Like that, you get some reports from internal third party firm contractors, you'll get reports from multiple agencies. And final point also you mentioned about the cyber insurance part, because they are the one who negotiate with the ransomware holders. Because there are, when we look at the dark web markets, and of course there will be a person who negotiate with the ransomware person, so we'll be giving this money, you just return back to us the data. And such cases maybe we can check with the cyber insurance person, because they have a legal things which can negotiate with the respective persons to make sure our data is safe. And thanks for your insights, Mr. Matt. So it was a valuable input. And we would like to know about some real world case studies, because when we look at your background, you have done a lots of real world case studies in your environment, and we would like to know about your real world case studies which you found like digital forensics plays the vital crucial role, we can say. So if you have that any kind of a case studies, and you solved that incident, maybe we would like to get an insights from you, Mr. Matt.
Okay, make sure I understood that. You're looking for maybe situations where risk has been identified and then mitigated based on what we found.
Exactly, yeah, Matt.
Great. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you need to look at things that are in your footprint. And hopefully, you have some sort of solution in place to essentially look at your perimeter, look at your footprint, and understand what exposure might be there. And that could be as sophisticated as a vendor that offers that service. It could be simply, hey, I've got the Shodan account. I know here's the ranges I need to consistently look at and monitor. Let me just say this, it's much easier, much better if you find your problems before some cyber threat actor does. And next thing you know, you've got cyber criminal activity because essentially they found it before you did or before your vendors did. And so I think there are just some interesting situations where sometimes things that you didn't know were there. And this can happen a lot with mergers and acquisitions. For example, if you work for a large organization, they acquire a smaller organization, they may not have the same security maturity. They may even have the same security mindset that you do. And so, for example, if it's primarily an organization where they've got a solution that was sort of a smaller startup, the mentality is more around agile development. It's not necessarily security first. It's security is what do we need to do after we've built this thing? And sometimes organizations will move so fast, but it's really hard, I think, to incorporate culture and sort of getting those organizations to understand security the way that you might as a mature organization that's been doing this stuff for a long time. And it's sort of one of those interesting things. You mentioned a lot of the talks I've given and so forth. I think a lot of what I've seen are problems I have actually given talks about, and then lo and behold, years later they pop up in real life. And it's just a lack of understanding on, for example, how web spidering and web crawling might work to identify accidental exposure. And those are things that I've actually seen firsthand, where something is put out there without really that understanding that people are looking for things that have been leaked out online all the time. And it doesn't ever stop, what I talked about earlier with digital forensics and incident response. And so it's very easy to accidentally have something that was sensitive, or something that maybe a group wasn't thinking, hey, this could potentially be found, because they think of maybe the things they built into their front end web application security. But what could happen is, let's say, for example, you have an API, an application programming interface, and it's hosted in the cloud. You've got your front end web page over here, but you've got an API over here, and you don't have enough conditional access to ensure that what's talking to the API is the front end website. And so if this is exposed, this API, now all of a sudden people can try to go around your web application firewalls. They can try going around your security, and they can find the API, and you maybe don't have all the monitoring visibility that you did with the front end website and the web application security that was built in over here. And so these are the kinds of things that I have seen that still sort of shock me to this day. And again, I've talked about all of these things with all of the conference talks I've given in the past. And then when I actually see them firsthand, it's just one of those things. It's like, wow, I wish somebody would have sat in on my talk and realized this was a potential exposure point that we should make sure is locked down. So I think those are the kinds of risks that I've encountered, that are things that after they're found, then we can go about fixing them. But it's always, it boils back down to, like I talked about earlier, visibility, and making sure that you are understanding your exposure footprint, and that you're actively monitoring for those things, and keeping track on what you have and what your exposure might be. And really, it gets back to doing a lot of the basics. And a lot of the things I see online, it's sort of shocking to me, the things that for example, if you look at the OWASP top 10, and these are the things that ideally you should fix first, because they are the most bang for the buck when it comes to web applications online. And you still see these common vulnerabilities like injection and cross-site scripting, and a lot of the things that you see over and over for year after year after year. And it's sort of shocking that we still struggle sometimes as an industry with fixing these problems that are very well known, very well documented, and it's generally understood by experienced security practitioners that these are the things that really shouldn't be happening, because we should be looking for these things. And that even boils down into a quality vulnerability management program, where you can understand, okay, here's the potential vulnerabilities we have, making sure you're staying up on your patches, putting in mitigations. Sometimes it's not just, hey, you install the patch and you're fixed. Sometimes it's you have to install the patch and then do these steps to ensure that you are then not vulnerable to a potential attack.
Thanks, Mr. Matt, because you have given inputs like a footprinting exposures, because you gave a lots of talks, even though we do have a OWASP SANS 25 to make sure our applications are safe, but still the organizations are facing a lots of issues to make sure to remediate all these issues. And you have given an insight stating like a footprint exposure showdown from the showdown, and they are getting a details, and then the mergers and acquisitions. when a small companies, and then they are acquiring like when a big company they're acquiring a small company, but the small company doesn't have a security measurement. In that cases also there are lots of case studies happening, and that times also there are lots of data breaches happen because of the acquisitions or mergers. And that was a good point, Mr. Matt. And the lack of understanding, that is also mentioned, because when a website has been built and then it has been hosted in an environment, and the web spider can able to retrieve all the misconfiguration issues based on the spidering URL itself. That is also in a case you mentioned. It was also we can able to fetch more information when we are doing for a forensics, and then the front end and API. And we do have a front and API, and in between there is no proper controls, and the attackers can able to get an information from the API calls. That is also you just mentioned. And visibility, what are all the assets that we do have, and what are all the things that we have for the maintenance, the company have for a maintenance. They need to have a visibility. If they do not have a visibility, of course they will be get into such kind of scenarios. And it was a great input, Mr. Matt, and thanks for your insights. And the other thing is, because you mentioned the first when the few minutes back you mentioned about the forensic examiner will be coming into a DFIR activities, and they'll be coming for the PSERT team will be coming for these kind of activities, and then you will be get into all the forensics and isolation part, and it will be kind of a manual process which we'll be following. Because few companies they'll be having an automation, but few companies, most of the companies are manual. When and the DFIR activities comes, and they'll just go and do an isolating thing, and then they'll be doing all the manual activities. But how an AI automation comes here? Let's say for a DFIR, if AI automation comes in, and what about the landscape of the DFIR in AI? Is there any automation will be coming through, or is there any how an AI automation will be fetching in the DFIR activities? Whether all these activities will be performed by AI, and the final part is the human only will be able to fetch in all these information. Let's say isolated A will be taken care of, and PSERT A will be taken care of, and the grading score A will be taken care of, and the final decision making the human will be coming in. Is there any process that will be coming in, or else is there any the challenges, or is there any how A will be evolved in DFIR activities, Mr. Matt?
So there's a lot there. I think one of the things, and hopefully with artificial intelligence and we get an AI, and it'll offer some things that augment what we do in digital forensics and incident response. I don't think it's going to get to a place where it replaces a digital forensic examiner, for example. And so for a digital forensic examiner, you're not probably going to lose your job to AI, but you could be replaced by somebody else that's using AI to do that job. And there's an open source tool called Chainsaw, I think, is really an awesome tool and a great example of something that you can use, and that will essentially just buzz saw through log files. It'll look for signs of an attack. It'll look for things that were potentially vulnerable, and that really can speed up an investigation, because if you have to look through hundreds of thousands of lines of log files by hand, or even import that stuff into a security incident event management platform, and you're using that SIM tool to try to do log analysis, and you're trying to do it very manually, we're talking a ton of work and very tedious. And so a tool like Chainsaw can really speed that up, and it can buzz through logs and look for those indicators much faster than even a team of people can, even if they're really wizard level with their search query language and their strategies for whatever sim platform they happen to be using. And so I think we are getting to a point where some of the tooling has definitely helped, and there's definitely a need for those kinds of tools. And I think really anything that can be done for any aspiring developers out there that can speed up those kinds of investigations, there's great opportunities out there, because I've seen a lot of good things out there. I still think we can get better in terms of getting to the analysis. There are also some sandbox tools that are reasonably good at detonating malware, and they're great at doing even a certain level of dynamic analysis or static analysis on files, and looking for malicious indicators and giving you a nice report. Again, those are things that can also help speed up an investigation. That's not to say that you may not have a piece of malware that's particularly good at evasion and sandbox evasion and detection evasion and incorporating a lot of things to make it harder for automation to analyze that sometimes a person sitting can see what's happening and you think, okay, I think I might know how I can trick this program into, progressing further, as opposed to if it detects, hey, I'm in a sandbox, I'm just going to stop executing code right here. So I think those things kind of work hand in hand. And I think really when we get into digital forensics and incident response as analysts, as engineers, we want to figure out how to, look for those things and really combine what they can bring us with in terms of speed and efficiency, and that seasoned, experienced look at something to better understand what it is that you're looking at, what you may have gotten compromised with, those kinds of things. So I think it's definitely constantly changing. Some of the tooling has really helped speed these kinds of things up. And again, I don't think they're a one-for-one replacement with people looking to come into this industry and space. But again, learn those kinds of tools, because that's really where things are starting to trend towards, and particularly as we move into AI is becoming more and more prevalent across the space.
Thanks, Mr. Matt. So, based on your input, so you clearly mentioned about there will be no impact, but it may not be. So, but we are not sure, and it may happen. But the thing is, the person who works in a is forensic examiner or who works in an incident response, he need to know about more tools and technologies to make sure automate it and speeden and fasten the process. And you have clearly mentioned about there is a chain shot tool, so which can give the attack vectors and attack scenarios to make sure it will be the speed up of the process. And then let's say there are lots of opportunities are also coming in, even though we have an AI, but the AI system will be managed by a human. That is also you just clearly mentioned. And there was some sandboxing environment to detonate a malware. So where you can use the sandboxing environment, and the sandboxing environment will be managed by a human, and it will be managed by a DFIR person. So likewise, there will be no impact. But if you look at the percentage level, like out of 100 percentage, but 10 percentage may be an impact, and 20 percentage may be an impact, but 80 percentage, the person who are in not only in a DFIR, in any domain, they need to make sure to get a knowledge about tools and technologies. And based on your input, we are get to know about that, Mr. Matt. And it's an interesting question now, because nowadays social medias, and we do have if we go to malware bazaar, we can download a malware sample, and we can go like many GitHub repositories, they do provide for images, photos, audios. And there is a term called deep fake. So of course, in all the internet social media, if you take 10 to 15 years back, there was a runaway. There is no runaway AI. But nowadays, runaway AI, we can use a prompt like text to video, video to audio, audio to video. We can change and interchange the voice, and we do have a multiple activities which happening in social medias. Now, in an enterprise level, what could be, and how do you see a threat like deep fake forensics? Because in future, of course, there will be lots of AI will be enhanced. 5 to 10 years back, there was a video has been populated, Will Smith video. So if you look at Will Smith video, they don't have such much of maturity level. But if you look at now, there is a runway gen and gen AI, runway AI, and we can see the maturity level is very huge, very good. And 80% seems to be the real video, but in future it will be the 100%. But how do you see the threat level for deepfake forensics in a corporate environment, and how do you see, and such kind of threats, how the corporate will act or fight against it, Mr. Matt?
Great question. So I think social engineering is still around because, frankly, it works. And honestly, in some cases, a lot of cases, it's far easier to socially engineer and get somebody to do things that you want than it is to, sort of defeat other security tools. And for example, we've seen this with Luma Stealer, where they're trying to get people to do start run and execute code in a run command. And that's just from visiting a web page, and they make it look like, hey, there's some suspicious activity, verify you're human. People are preconditioned now to be used to having to do these CAPTCHA challenges, these I am not a robot challenges. And so that set the table for some of these social engineering attacks on the web. So it's always interesting to see the tooling change. I think as deepfakes get more and more convincing, as they get harder and harder to detect, I think it's going to be one of these things where people are going to need a little bit of a dose of skepticism, natural skepticism, as far as a people skill. And if something doesn't seem right, or if something seems like, let me just double check, I think it's going to get to a point where we might be going back to, okay, somebody at upper C level just asked me to buy some gift cards. Well, let me reach out to a contact number that I have specific for that person, not one that I was fed, but one that I have for that person, just to verify. I think we're going to have to get used to getting asked questions of saying, was this really you? And did you really ask for this? The other thing that wouldn't surprise me is if, I think back to encryption, the early days of PGP for pretty good privacy, there was a concept called web of trust. And it's been largely displaced by people using PKI for things as far as key infrastructure and having private keys and that sort of thing. The idea behind web of trust was, I've got this person's private key. I know that they gave me this key, and so I'm going to mark it as I trust it. And if you have enough people trust something, it becomes more believable as trustworthy. Could we see a return to something like that? I think maybe. I could be wrong, but it's an interesting concept, and something I've been kind of thinking about myself is, I wonder if we go back to something as old as a concept of web of trust as being potentially a methodology for, sort of verifying things. But I think, as well, just even within a PKI space or web of trust space, I think we might get to, sort of a point where we're doing these verifications, and as things move forward, we need to even start thinking about quantum resistant cryptography, and we need to think of ways we can digitally sign things so they become more trustworthy. I think as deepfakes have gotten better, it's going to force our hands as an industry to really start looking at these kinds of things conceptually to, sort of combat deepfakes. And it is challenging, right? And it's all around us, and people are purposely making deepfake videos. Sometimes they're making them specifically to socially engineer people or convince people something happened that really didn't. Sometimes they're created just out of parody as joke, and they're, at least in the United States, they're protected by these parody laws where you're allowed to sort of make fun of something if it's obvious that you're making fun of it and you're upfront about that. But yeah, it's definitely a new threat vector that's getting more and more convincing. And certainly there have been news stories where it's worked, and it's amazing the sample size of video and audio that people can sample and now produce a convincing deepfake video or audio file to convince another person that this request is legitimate, even when it's completely social engineering with really almost a Hollywood movie kind of production quality to it, where it becomes that much more convincing.
Thanks, Matt. So you got various inputs, like initially there was a stellar malware, a stellar malware. People try to do a social engineering because it is kind of maybe they can host in a different environment, like downloading gaming sites or any kind of offers or QRL jacking, click jacking. There are many places they do a social engineering, and based on the AI itself, because you mentioned the PKI, because when we are transmitting a data, and if the key is if we are getting a key from the particular environment, and we will be accepting it. Likewise, there will be many challenges is going to happen in future. That is also you mentioned there will be a verification standards which will be coming for AI as well for the deepfake in future. So we need to make sure to bring a more verifications methods whether the photo is really made it by or captured by in a photo or in a phone, or else it is captured or edited or modified with any kind of a deepfake tools. And we need to have a multiple verification method standards and threat vectors also, which we are having, like we do have a threat vectors. And in future for particularly deepfake itself, we might have a threat vectors where we'll be looking at all these images and we'll look at the frameworks. There will be lots of frameworks may come in. So thanks for your inputs, Matt. So you have just explained it very, we got a lots of insights from you. And now, if you are a hiring manager, so what are the must have tools for DFIR professional, and how do you choose the right one for the specific case? Let's say your company need a person, and I'm going to apply for a job, and if you are a hiring manager, what must have tools which you'll be looking from a candidate, and how do you choose them? Because few person they choose, hey, you know the process, then we will take you, I'll take you out. And if you don't know this particular technical term, we don't take you, we don't want it, you will reject it. So likewise, if you are a hiring manager, what capabilities and skills which you observe from the person or which you take it from the candidate to make sure he'll be with your team, Mr. Matt?
So I love this question in part because I interview where I work. I essentially interview everybody that comes in to do any level of incident response role, from a more junior SOC analyst to somebody that's all the way at a principal security engineer level, specific for incident response, and really everything in between. I would also say even people that are executive managers above me, I sometimes get to interview them as well. Really, rather than specific tools, I really just want to make sure that whoever I'm talking to has a good thought process, and really understands. In other words, the answer better makes sense to me. And I can think of one example where, as long as you know a number of tools, as long as you understand digital forensics incident response, I'm going to ask you questions. I can think of one candidate, for example, did really well and had a great personality, but every answer was a particular security solution. And this person is probably wizard level with this particular security solution, but every answer they gave me was this one particular security solution. So I started asking him questions I knew that weren't going to be in that one security solution, just to understand, do they know what a web attack looks like? Because that's not going to be in your EDR platform. So, for example, do you understand what the uh, series are for web response codes? And can you tell me what they are? If I give you a particular scenario saying, hey, I've got this is what the situation looks like, can they distinguish for me which one is more concerning to you as an incident responder and why? What I'm looking for is really a level of knowledge where, if they can give me an answer and explain it, and even if it doesn't match what I'm thinking is the answer I'm looking for, if they have sound rationale for explaining the answer, and I feel like they're getting it right, or they've got some really good insights. I've given a talk called Becoming an IR Superstar that literally is about incident response. Hopefully, folks will look online and find a video of that. It's been recorded at a few places. I think Secure WV probably had the best one. But what I lay out are really a fundamental understanding of the basics. And when it comes to incident response, hopefully the candidate knows something about the Windows operating system. Hopefully they know a little bit about the Linux operating system. Hopefully they understand log files. And hopefully they're understanding some things like, uh, even today, some level of packet analysis capabilities, those kinds of things. And it's less to me about the tools they prefer to use. It's that they can name a tool, why they're using it, and explain what they've gotten out of it. And in some cases, maybe it's a commercial enterprise tool that wherever they've worked paid money to get this tool. Maybe it's somebody that has been learning this stuff on their own. And I think ENISA, which the European Union puts out some pretty good stuff. So if they've learned the basics, if they understand, really what's normal, what's not normal, if they understand, for example, here's some encoded strings. Can you identify what this string that you've never seen before might be? Hopefully, there's some telltale indicators that they can understand. Oh, yeah, it's got an equal sign or two at the end. That's a base 64 pad to make sure it's at the right bit level. So I don't know for sure. It's some sort of base encryption, most likely, and I would try base 64 first, just because it's the most prevalent. If they can, tell me those foundational things, that tells me they've looked at some stuff. They've looked at some actual attack scenarios, and they can describe what it is they're looking at. And it's less for me the tooling. They for example, like, well, hey, I use base 64 command in Linux to decode this. I use a web tool like CyberChef. I can use PowerShell and the script. I don't care the technology. For me, it's more or less like, here's what I think it is. Here's how I would go about trying to understand what I'm looking at. And so for me, again, just kind of understanding, hopefully the people know some things about networking, basic computer networking, network attacks. They understand web servers, because if you're doing digital forensics and incident response, your websites are under attack all the time. Hopefully they can understand some of those OWASP top 10 things I talked about earlier. Really just looking for somebody that's got some good all-around experience and can explain what those things are, and just things that tell me that they probably dabbled with some different things. Honestly, the more things somebody has sort of messed around with, but as long as they have experience using something, if I see somebody has offensive security tools in their resume, those are great, because those will tell me uh, if they know what tools are out there, how they work, and what they do. And so I might just ask them a very open-ended question of, what are some of your favorite offensive security tools, and what did you learn by using them? And I don't care what they tell me. If they can name off several tools and they have it right, what those tools do, and then they might be able to describe some of the artifacts they leave behind, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody that can, doesn't have a rehearsed answer, somebody that just, can say, hey, here's what I've used, but I'm not asking for anything in particular. I don't care if they tell me about their favorite, offline password crackers. I don't care if they tell me about their favorite AppSec tools that they use for intercepting proxies and doing, web traffic analysis. I don't care if they tell me about their favorite viewers for log files, or what their favorite SIM platforms are. I'm really looking for somebody that understands where the logs ultimately come from, and where they can get that information, and what they might be looking for given a particular scenario. That, for me personally, is what I look for when I'm interviewing candidates.
Thanks, Matt, because it was a great input. Because the first point itself, which you mentioned, was thought process. I don't care what they use, I don't care what the tools they use, and based on their experience, I'm going to take them in. But whether if he use any tools, but how did he use it and why he's using it? Since when he started using a tool and he knows, because few person they only download a tool, they'll just executing it and then they'll export the report and they'll tell I have used this tool. And but based on your the approach, if you are using a tool, because you have mentioned a tool name in resume, why did you use it, what you have learned from it, and you will be having a deep dive analysis on the term which he mentioned in a resume. And it was a great approach, Matt, because thanks for your insight as well. Because many person they are not aware of, they get content from different resume and then they just copy paste it and then put it in a resume and then they'll be submitting it for a job position. Yes, Matt.
One last ad. If it's on your resume, I'm going to ask you a question about it, whatever it is. I don't care, what it is. I've been around enough technology and security stuff for so long that I can ask a very open-ended question, and based on the answer I get back will tell me those who maybe dabbled with something one time and they never looked at it again and they don't really remember it. So if it's on your resume, make sure that you actually know the topic, because I'm going to actually ask questions about it, and I expect an answer that shows me that you've actually worked in that particular thing, no matter what that thing is. I don't care if it's, hey, I was developing an API. I'm going to ask you a question about API development, even if it's not exactly relevant to the job, because what I look for as well is, okay, so if you've worked on API development, how would you, as a security person, it shows me their mindset. How would you attack it if you were going to attack this thing, or what maybe malicious thing could you do with an API if it had a misconfiguration? And again, it's really that mindset, and it's the ability for the candidate to answer a very open-ended question, and it's less that I get a precise answer that's this, that, or the other thing. It's more an overall, can they explain themselves? Does it make sense to me? And do I know they know what they're talking about based on the answer I get?
Exactly, Mr. Matt, because your approach was excellent one. Because I'm not going to ask you a questions. I'm going to ask you a question from the point which you have mentioned, and that's where you told I am looking some diverse background. So like diverse background, he may have a basics, and he may have to learn about the log files if he has the knowledge. If he has a long knowledge, OS information, Linux information, networking information, and then you mentioned about packet analysis. If something he worked on packet analysis, that would be great. And OWASP, SANS 25. So he may have the diverse background, but whatever the point which he mentioned, I'm going to ask a question from that. I'll not going to take like see, I know this particular topic and I'm going to ask you a questions, and if you know the answer, then I'll reject you. I'm not going to take that approach. Your approach is, it's an excellent approach. I'm not going to ask a questions from my end, and I'm going to ask a questions what you know, what you mentioned, the term which you mentioned in resume. That's what I'm just going to get a question from you. That's what I'm going to take a candidate for me as well. It was an excellent approach, Mr. Matt. And the final question is, because when I was looking at your LinkedIn and background, you are working on a couple of upcoming conference and speaking engagements, Mr. Matt. So maybe if you can share insights about that, and maybe that would be helpful for our cyber warriors and our channel, Mr. Matt. So about your upcoming conference and like speaking engagement, Mr. Matt.
Sure, absolutely. I'm probably going to be forgetting some here, but I do a lot of public speaking. To date, I have spoken at 34 different annual security and hacker conferences around the United States. Two of those were actually international virtual talks. One was based out of Lima, Peru. The other was based out of Oslo, Norway. So I've done a couple international, but mostly I speak across the United States. So this coming weekend, Saturday, March 29th, I'm speaking at B-Side San Diego with a talk called Lies, Telephony, and Hacking History. I also have been accepted to um, in May, Kakalaki Con in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And that is a talk on cloud security, which I have titled Cloud Security and Other Assorted Cautionary Tales, which is a lot of, hey, here's some bad things I've seen. Let's make sure we're not doing these mistakes. But also, it's some of the big three cloud platforms, and here's how you go hunting. We talked about exposure management and that kind of thing earlier. It really speaks to the heart of that. Those two things I have for sure coming up. Also, in October, I always have a lot of things coming up, and there's things I know I'll be speaking at. CDO Magazine is having their cybersecurity summit. I'm one of the co-chairs for that particular conference. There is also Queen City Con is my own personal one of my favorites. It is in Cincinnati, nearby where I live. It's also the fastest growing hacker conference in the country. So if anybody can get to Cincinnati, if you're already in the United States, highly recommend it. QueenCityCon.org is just a great hacker conference. There were over 600 attendees last year. I actually have a lifetime appointment to give keynote addresses at that conference. I've already started on a to be announced topic for my Queen City Con 3 keynote. I've keynoted the other two. Over my shoulder, you can see I got a Queen City Con black badge, which gets me into the conference for life, no matter what. But also, I've got that lifetime appointment for keynote addresses. Probably be at the Information Security Summit, which I believe is October 29th, 30th, and 31st in Cleveland, Ohio. They seemingly have me back every year. There's also Secure WV in Charleston, West Virginia. Hopefully, I'm able to bring that cloud security talk there. I want to say I've spoken at the last 6 times they had a conference there, including the keynote last year, and be a lot of other things. So anybody that wants to try to keep tabs on where I'm speaking, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. Fairly easy to find out there. On the X social media platform, I'm at C3RKAH, and I always try to post everything I'm speaking at on those two social media platforms. There's a lot of other platforms out there. I struggle just to keep up to date with two of them. So those are the two I've been on for a long time and continue to operate on. But anything I'm speaking at, I'm also hopeful that CornCon in Davenport, Iowa, the Quad Cities region, hopefully they have me back for a third year in a row. These are some of my favorite conferences that I've mentioned, and definitely some I know I'm going back. Others I'm very hopeful to be going back. But again, if you follow my social media stuff, everything I'm going to be doing will definitely be posted out there. And then I also do a lot of other meetup groups, technology meetup groups, information security meetup groups. I'm already looking at the SIMPA Security SIG. I might be speaking there next month on a career management talk, career guidance talk I call navigating the cybersecurity landscape. So hopefully I'll be announcing that soon. I got to double check some calendar things, but I always have a lot of stuff coming up. So thank you very much for asking that.
Thanks, Matt, because uh, you have shared the GitHub repositories as well. Because when I looked at the repositories from 2019 to till now, so you have presented the lots of papers and the document which I have seen. And we mentioned the master of IR, right? So I have looked at the presentation as well. It was very good, and some phone radio frequencies talks also you have done, and it was very great insights which I have looked into, Matt. And it's been like the 45 minutes to 50 minutes we had a discussion, and we got a lots of insights on DFIR. Because when initially we started on DFIR and what is DFIR. You have given the insights about what is forensics, what is incident response, and the biggest challenge in a corporate environment about the forensic analysis when the ransomware attacks comes in. And then you have explained about the AI automation, if digital forensics, if any automation comes in, what about the job roles will be impacted or it can be impacted. So that is also the insights which you gave. And later on, you just gave the deep fake forensics. Prevention and methodologies or any kind of rules and regulations which will be coming in future. That is also you just gave some insights as well. And when you are a hiring manager, how do you recruit? So that the point was very excellent, because that's what our cyber warriors may reach out to you via LinkedIn. And then what I'll do is also your paper presentation, the repositories. After when I posting in YouTube video, I'll put all these reference and the LinkedIn connection names also, so that they'll be reaching out to you for the further reference as well, Mr. Matt. It's been 40 to 50 minutes. So the insights were excellent, and myself and our cyber warriors learned a lot, because few DFIR activities we come to know through research, and I worked on few things. But our cyber warriors are keenly wants to get into such a kind of domains. So for that, your insights are valuable, and of course, your time is valuable for us, Mr. Matt. And thanks for your time, Matt. And because you have lent your 45 minutes with us, and for our cyber warriors, and we always say, because you invested time on us, and of course, we got a lots of learning for the next 10 years. Because the term which you mentioned, each and every term has a lots of insights as well. So they'll our cyber warriors will be looking at the terms, and they'll be looking at the insights, and they'll be looking at your pages, you are looking at your papers from 2019 to till now. So it's like a 6 to 7 years presentation that we have to go through it, and then to learn from it. So there are lots of things our cyber warriors will be following up from you, Mr. Matt. And thanks for your time, Matt. And thank you so much for coming this podcast, Mr. Matt.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on the Cyber Voyage podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Matt.